Hello, this is History of Medieval India, Satish Chandra. So, we are reading chapter 4, Economic and Social Life, Education and Religious Belief. Although we have not studied political development in North India from 1000 to 1200, the entire period from 800 to 1200 may be regarded as one for the purpose of studying economic, social life, and religious belief. Economic and social life ideas and beliefs change much more slowly than political life. That is why many of the earlier features which existed between the 9th century continued during this period also. At the same time, there were a number of new factors which made the period different from the earlier one. Generally speaking, new elements as well as elements of continuity are found in every historical period, but the extent and direction change varies. Trade and commerce. The economic situation, especially trade and commerce in the country during the period, is a matter of debate among historians. Some consider it to be the period of stagnation and decline, a setback both of foreign trade and long distance trade within the country, decline of towns and general greater localism and regionalism. The virtual absence of gold coins till the 10th century is considered to be a proof of this. We can hardly examine here all these points in detail. Suffice it to say that the fall of Roman Empire did not seriously affect India's trade with the West since two large empires. The Byzantine Empire with its base in Constantinople and the okay and the Sassanid Empire based in the Iraq rose during the subsequent period. Both of them took keen interest in trade with India and the Indian Ocean region. After the rise of the Arab Empire, in the 7th century, the Arab expanded the trade of the West to India, Southeast Asia, and China. There is no reason to believe that Indian trades were excluded from the expanded trade. Hence, gold and silver continued to come to India in return for its favorable trade. That is why India continued to be constantly a country full of gold and silver, and hence an attractive prize for foreign invaders to invade and trade with. Why the gold and silver was used for decoration, temples and palaces are for jewelry or simply buried for further use and not used for coinage is a question to which no satisfactory answer is available. As we have seen how a large number of states arose in the country during the period, and the growing power and the authority of those holding superior rights in land. Many of these kingdoms expand agricultural by building bunds, wells, etc. In some instances, as in Bengal, Sindh, and the Tamil country, in order to strengthen their own position. The rulers invited Brahmins to settle down by giving them grants of rent-free lands. Since the bulk of these lands were uncultivated, many tribesmen who were nomads or cattle rearers or food gatherers were induced to settle down to agriculture. Such expansion of cultivation further strengthened the position of the local chiefmen, samantas, etc. We do not know the impact of this development on internal trade. The growth of small towns which catered to local trade along with the greater local self-sufficiency seems to have gone hand in hand. In North India in particular, the decline of long distance trade within the country apparently led to the decline of trade guilds or shrinks and sanghas. The guilds have often consisted of people belonging to different castes. They had their own rules of conduct which the members were legally bound to obey and were entitled to lend of or borrow money or receive endorsement. With the decline of long distance trade and commerce, these bodies lost their formal importance. We find very few reference in North India during the period of guilds receiving endowment. In the course of time, some of the older shrines submerged as subcaste. For example, Davdas Shrine, which was a glit, became a subcaste of the Vaishyas. Jainism, which was patronized by the mercantile section, also received a setback in North India. In some of the Dharma Shastra which were written during the period, a ban is put on travel beyond the area where the munja grass does not grow or where the black gazelle does not roam. That is outside India proper. Okay, munja grass. grass. Excuse me. Travel across the salt sea were also considered polluting. These bans were not taken seriously, for we have account of Indian merchants, philosophers, medical men and craftsmen visiting Baghdad and other Muslim town in West Asia during this period. Perhaps the ban was meant for Brahmins only, or was meant to discourage too many Indians going to the area dominated by Islam in the west and Buddhist in the east, for fear of their bringing back heretical religion idea which may be embarrassing and unacceptable to the Brahmins and the ruling group. The ban on sea travel did not interfere with the growth of Indians' overseas trade with the countries of Southeast Asia and China. A brisk trade between South India and the countries of Southeast Asia had started from the 6th century onwards. The growing geographical knowledge about the countries of the areas is reflected in literature of that time. The peculiar feature of the languages of the area, their dress, etc., are mentioned in the book of the period, such as Harisen, Barihatkat Kosh. There are many stories about the adventures of the Indian merchants in the magical waters of the area, stories which became the basis of the well known story of Sindbad and the sailor. The Indian merchants were organized in guilds, the most famous of them being the Manigraman and the Nanadesa, which had been active since early period. These guilds displayed a spirit of the enterprise, engaging in retail and wholesale trade in many foreign countries. They also gave handsome grants to temple which became center of social and cultural life, and sometimes also advance money for trade. Many of the Indian traders settled down in these countries. Some of them took wives from the local population. The priest followed the traders. In the way, both Buddhist and Hindu religious ideas were introduced in the area. The Buddhist temple of Borobudur Borobudur in the Java and the Hindu temple of Angkor Wat in Cambodia testify to the spread of both these regions there. Some of the ruling family of the area were semi-Hinduized and they welcomed trade and culture religion with India. In this way, Indian culture mingled with the local culture to establish new literary and cultural forms. Some observers think that the material prosperity of the Southeast Asian country, the growing of cultivation and establishment of large states was based in large measure on the introduction of the Indian techniques of irrigated rice cultivation. The chief Indian port for sailing to Java, Sumatra, etc. was Tamarali Pat Tumkur in Bengal. Tamalluk in Bengal. In most of the stories of this period, merchants started for Suvarna Dweep, modern Indonesia, or to Kathaha, Kedah in Malaya, from Tamarillipet. A 14th century written, okay, a 14th century writer in the Java speaks of people from Jambudweep, that is India, Karnataka, South India, and Gound, Bengal, coming unnecessarily in big numbers in large ship. Traders from Gujarat also took part in this trade. On account of this, its prosperity, China has become a main focus of trade in the Indian Ocean. The China consumed enormous quantity of spices which were important for Southeast Asia and India. They also imported ivory, the best of which came from the Africa, and glassware, which came from the West Asia. To these were added medicinal herbs, and incense. Okay, and all type of rare commodities. Generally, products from Africa and West Asia did not go beyond Malabar in South India, nor did many Chinese ship go beyond the Moluccas in Southeast Asia. Thus, both India and Asia were important staging center for trade between China and the countries of West Asia and Africa. Okay. India traders, especially from the Tamil country and Kalinga, played an active role in the trade, along with Persian and at a later stage the Arabs. Much of the trade to China was carried in Indian ship, the teakwood of Malabar, Bengal, and Burma, providing the basis of the strong tradition of shipbuilding. The weather conditions were also such that it was not possible for the ship to sail straight from the Middle East to China. The ship would have to wait for a long period in the ports in between for favorable winds which blew from the west to the east before the monsoon and from east to west after the monsoon. Indian and Southeast Asian ports were preferred by the merchants for the purpose. The main seaport for foreign trade in China during the period was Canton or Kanuf, as the Arab travelers called it. Okay, Canton or Kanuf. Buddhist scholars went from India to China by the sea route. The Chinese chronicle tell us that number of Indian monks in the Chinese court towards the close of the 10th and the beginning of the 11th century was the highest in the Chinese history. A Chinese account of slightly higher period tells us that the Canton River was full of ships from Indian Peninsula and Arab. It says that in Canton itself there were three Hindu temples in which Indians resided. The presence of Indians in the Chinese Sea is testified to be Japanese record, which give the credit of introducing cotton into Japan and or sorry to Indians who were carried over to the country by the black current. Indian rulers, particularly the Pala and the Sela rulers of Bengal and the Pallava and the Chola rulers of South India, tried to encourage this trade by sending a series of embassies to the Chinese emperors. The Chola ruler Rajendra first sent a naval expedition against Malaya and the neighboring country to overcome their interference in the trade with China. The embassy sent to China by Rajendra first travelled in an Indian ship. This is evidence to show that there were many shipyards which were located on the west coast, including Gujarat. Thus, growth of Indian foreign trade in the area was based on the strong maritime tradition, including shipbuilding and the skill and enterprises of its trade. The Chinese trade was very favorable to the countries engaged in it. So much so that in the 13th century, the Chinese government tried to restrict the export of gold and silver from China. Indian ship gradually gave way to the Arab and the Chinese ships, which were bigger and faster. We are told that the Chinese ship were several stories high and carried 600 passengers apart from 400 soldiers. An important factor in the growth of the Chinese ships was the use of a Marian compass, an invention which later traveled from China to the West. Already Indian science and technology were being left behind. Thus, India's trade with the Western Asia and with Southeast Asia and China grew steadily. The lead in this trade was taken by South India, Bengal, and Gujarat. Thus, was an important factor in the wealth and prosperity of the area. Thank you.